How's it going, game designers? I've been working on something new lately. As you can see in the background, it's really cool. This sort of Final Fantasy VII fan game, I guess, so to speak. I don't know. And you can see on screen that, yeah, I'm using Aerith as a character. If you haven't seen or played Final Fantasy VII, you really gotta go to Steam right now, go get it, and go play it. It's such an awesome game. So I'm using Aerith. I downloaded this model, I forgot where, but I think it came with a license. Yeah. But the colors I did myself, and the eyes I think came with the model, I can't remember. It's been a while since I got this model. Got it back in a couple of months ago actually. It's got an awesome walk cycle, thank you for the awesome guy who did this. His name is Bernd. And currently he's doing a degree in animation, so he told me. Well, you don't actually learn animation, I don't know. He's German, by the way, really nice guy. Yeah, dude, this animation is just so sick. I can't get over it. Anyways, in a moment I'll show you how to set this up, actually. It was really easy, to be honest with you, to get this looking the way it's meant to look, like now. It is a pain in the ass because you kind of have to keep the aspect ratio correctly, otherwise the masking just goes nuts and it just doesn't work at all. And the actual image doesn't match the 3D geometry. So on the left over here, well actually, let me show you the painting I did. So this is the painting I did a while ago. The process of this painting, I was supposed to make a video of it, but I totally forgot and I did the painting anyways without making a time lapse of it. Basically, I modeled this all out in Blender, rendered it with cycles, and you end up with something like such. Alright, so basically what you do is you model something in Blender. In this case, I modeled a classroom in Blender. It took me a couple of days to do this model. I essentially just modeled the chairs and the table, and modeled the classroom, the actual classroom itself. And then I duplicated the chairs and the tables, and I just put them all over the show. And the windows, I was gonna paint the scenery outside, actually. I ended up just doing clouds because I kind of wanted the feeling of abandonedness in the image itself. So this first pass over here is actually an ambient occlusion pass. So basically I am collecting all the light that's bouncing around the room and then putting it into an image. You can separate these passes out in Blender yourself in the rendering phase. So you have the ambient occlusion pass, and then you have the shadows pass. This shadows pass is plain shadows, there's no ambient occlusion here, and is using Blender cycle shadow. The next pass is a color pass, which contains all the diffuse data for the scene, and if you put them all together, it kind of looks like this. So this is all the color data put together from a single render cycle. Oh, let's get rid of that because that wasn't in the render. As you can see, it's really grainy. You can kind of fix it by rendering for a longer time in cycles. I didn't do that because I kind of wanted a film effect on the actual image itself. So I left that in there, no problem. I didn't render for too long. And then what I did was I went over it with a paintbrush using my Wacom tablet, and then there's the line art layer, which you can see has the paper in it as well. Should probably remove that actually. Well, what am I doing? Here we go. Okay, so no, it's that one. So adding the line art to it, you can see, the line art I've just gone over, it was originally black. I used Blender Render, the Blender built-in render, to render the lines, and I rendered the lines, the further away the lines were from the camera, the thinner they were, sort of thing. And then I went over them with orange where I thought it was applicable, and then you can see in the dark areas you can't really see the line that much, so it kind of looks like almost all the objects have like this rim lighting going around it. I think that's a really cool effect. That's just my style anyways. You can kind of do what you want with the image. And then afterwards I brought in some paintbrushes, some custom ones that I got from Divine Art, and I kind of just went over. The first thing I thought about was in the background. Well, let me just turn the background on that I drew. So I drew a skybox in the background in the transparent section, and this is what I drew. And you can see it looks fine, it looks okay, but my style is more flashy, kind of in your face. Tons of visual effects, tons of bloom, tons of glare, tons of camera dirt effect, stuff like that going on. And so I'm going to turn on each of these layers, and each of these layers is a sort of addition to the actual piece itself. So as I turn on these layers, you can see that I did some sort of glare that's bouncing off the sun outside, because the sun is actually coming in this direction over here. And as I turn it on, you'll see more and more sort of some subtle, some not so subtle effects going on. Some of them don't actually do anything. Oh, okay. The cabinet is metal, and metal usually gives off a very blue kind of lens glare. So there's the glare over there. It's bloomed a little bit as well because the sun is bouncing off the cabinet straight into the lens. We got a little bit of lens light distortion on the reflections of the cabinet. And then over here we got some more sharp little specular going on over here. And then we have some caustics effect. Caustics is the light that bounces around the room, but it's more noticeable. It's not like ambient occlusion. Ambient occlusion is just the light that bounces, that diffuses off every object. Caustics is more color transfer, radiance sort of thing. And then we have the specular of the windows. This is just your standard. I just went over it with a white paintbrush with about 5% opacity in places where I thought it needed some more reflection, specular. Alright, so that's all the layers enabled now. As you can see, it's not so lively. It's kind of, I don't know, dull, and my style is more in your face. So this is not exactly in your face, it's really subtle. The light coming through the room is essentially just bouncing around the room, and you don't get some really, really cool effects going on here. So if I turn on the effect, you can see that there's a lot of glare, there's a lot of bloom, there's a lot going on over here, lens dirt and all that other stuff. So you get to a final piece like this, and this I've put up on Divine Art as a single piece so people can see it. And about 2 months later, I was like, hey, I should make a game out of this, it'd be cool. And I thought, how do I do this? Because other than making masks would look, I don't know, cheap in a way. It would look too much like 2D going on, and it would be a lot of work to have to restrict where the player goes. All these other factors that come into play. Although, to be fair, if I did do masks, I could do some sort of parallax effect, and you can't do a parallax effect with this setup that's going on over here because it just doesn't work. You're working off a 2D image, and you're kind of masking it with the 3D proxy model behind it. Anyways, we'll get to that in a second. So now, what I wanted was all these effects to be existing in the engine, but I kind of wanted them to be a little bit more interactive than the player being able to walk essentially on top of everything, on top of all the effects. So what I did was I saved out all the visual effects separately. So I saved this gradient and I saved that gradient, and I saved out the effects on top of it. So essentially you end up with an image just like this with no effects on top of it. And then obviously afterwards you save out all the effects so you can put them on top of it in the actual game itself. So bring up Unity again. In Unity you can see that the effects and the actual image has been replicated. Ignore the character in the middle over here for now. That's something we'll talk about in a few minutes. And if we look at the camera setup over here, I'll show you that in a sec. So I've used a very, very nice plugin. It costs $40, but it's definitely worth it. It's called Colorful. If you go into Unity Store, type in Colorful, you'll get it. So if I select Yield Camera here, go into it, you can see that I'm using 2Blend Colorful plugin scripts. These 2 blends cover both the lens flare and the glare on the top left side of the camera. And then I've got a sharpen script on top of that just to make it a little bit more, make the character and anything else that's 3D inside the game blend in a little bit more with the surrounding visuals and the image itself. And I've got some interactive bloom. It's subtle, very subtle, just on top of all the other effects and stuff like that. And then I've got some vignetting going on, just to give it a more camera-like feel. I had anti-aliasing enabled, but I felt like it was kind of doubling down my image a little bit more than I would like. It was making it all soft, and I wanted everything really sharp and really kind of pixely, sort of a blend between old school and new school with technologies and feels and looks and stuff like that. Now we get to the real interesting part over here. Let me just move game over here. If I turn on texture wire, you can see that I have the actual object that I've exported from Blender that I painted over into the Unity engine itself. So basically what I'm doing is, or what's happening rather, is that I'm using the 3D model in order to mask off and use it as a depth buffer for another render. So I'm using one camera, which is my orthographic camera over here, to render the image, my image from Photoshop, or the one that I've exported, this one, into view over here. Now if we were to remove this object, you'll be able to see a little imprint or ghost of that object going on the right hand side in the game. If I were to remove it completely, you'll see that the character is now walking sort of on top of the image. There's no 3D going on over here. It's kind of a bit weird. So let me undo that. So I'm using the 3D object as a sort of depth test, depth buffer for the next render, for the next camera. I've got a custom little shader we'll put on this object. I'll show it to you now. It's really small, really easy to do. All this lighting should be off anyways. All it does is render the depth buffer. That's all it does. It doesn't render diffuse, doesn't render specular, nothing else like that. That's all it does. All it does is render to depth buffer. Then the rest of the objects are rendered, the diffuse is rendered, specular is rendered, all this other normal fancy stuff that goes on inside the game engine, it's rendered after this object has been depth tested. So you end up with sort of this object kind of masking out in real time all the objects behind it according to the distance it is from the camera itself. So if there's a raycast, for instance, going from the camera to Aerith's left foot, it would hit the classroom object first, and then it would return a sort of depth value. So I have two cameras set up here because one camera needs to render the image itself, and it's rendering it sort of as a GUI texture, and it's rendering it according to what the depth test is for this object that I've selected now. So that's basically all it is. All it is just a very basic painting that I did without the effects on top of it. It's been put into the game, rendered via orthographic view, and I'm using the standard camera. Obviously your setup, for example, the this object, and this camera, and the camera rotations and field of view need to be the same as what you rendered in Blender, so it matches. And I'm taking this object and depth testing it against other objects, and then I'm rendering the image according to what the depth test, what information comes back from the depth test, and that's basically it. So if I show you the game again, let's give this a play. You can see, I think you'll notice it better now, that certain parts of Aerith will clip through as if the object was actually there. I mean, it is, but it's just not being rendered in a traditional way. I'm essentially colliding with some custom colliders. I never used a mesh collider for this because it would be too expensive. It's expensive as it is already. Probably see the stats as like 60 FPS. It's crazy because there's a lot of vertices that I've exported that are required in order to mask, real-time mask off this image itself. Yeah, it's a cool technique. Probably find that Square Enix in Final Fantasy VII probably didn't use this technique because it would be too expensive, seeing as that they had such little polygons on screen anyways at one time. They probably just painted an image, then used custom 2D masks, static masks, in order to mask off the characters from the screen. And I thought of that for a moment, and I thought it would be too much work for me because I'd already kind of done the work. The 3D object was already there. All I had to do was import it very painfully into Unity. Yes, it was a painful process. There was a lot of iterations through the object because at first the object was something like, I don't know, I think it was 800,000 triangles. I thought, nah, this is crazy, it's just too high. So I had to decimate the faces and delete some objects, some faces that were not actually in the scene but were required for ambient occlusion. Eventually I got to, I think it was 70,000 triangles. There was some stuff missing, so I added some stuff back into it. And I eventually arrived to this scene. I could make other scenes, but it would probably take me some time to actually model and paint them, so for now it's just a single scene that I've been experimenting with. But now enough from me, I'll leave you with an amazing remastered edition of the Final Fantasy VII tracks done by Final Tim. Here's a bigger shot of the thumbnail. This is English over and out. Yeah.